everyone. In this episode of the Tombstone Tourist, I'm going to be wrapping up my visit to the state of Iowa with a stop here in the small village of West Branch. Here I'm going to be visiting the birthplace and final resting place of our 31st president, Herbert Clark Hoover, who was the first president to be born west of the Mississippi River. Located here in West Branch is the Herbert Hoover National Historic Site that features the Birthplace Cottage, the family Blacksmith Shop, and a number of other historic buildings that have been preserved by the National Park Service. The Herbert Hoover Presidential Library and Museum that is administered by the National Archives is also located here adjacent to the historic site. The graves of President Hoover and his wife Lou Henry Hoover are also located here just a short walk from the historic site and his Presidential Library and Museum. I'm going to begin my visit here at the tiny two-room cottage where the future president was born on August 10th, 1874. Like most other people living here at the time, the Hoovers were Quakers and lived a very humble life. Sometime around 1854, the Hoovers, including Herbert's parents, grandparents, and several aunts and uncles, moved from Ohio to Iowa, settling here in Cedar County. They joined the other Quaker families who had settled here and forming the village of West Branch. This small cottage was the home of Jesse and Holden Minthorn. It featured a short hall or breezeway with doors at either end. During the summer months, the doors were open to allow air to circulate, which cooled the house during the hot summer months. On either side of the breezeway were two rooms. One room served as the kitchen, while the other served as the bedroom. The couple had three children, Theodore, Herbert, and Mary, who were all born here in this small cottage. The Hoovers were well thought of in this tiny community. Neighbors often described them as very pleasant and a well-liked family. As a child, Herbert often got stuck in the mud when trying to cross the unpaved streets. Town folks and family members began calling him our little stick in the mud. It was just a short walk out the back door of the cottage to the blacksmith shop that Jesse built and operated. Jesse was a good-natured man and always had a joke or a funny story to tell to his customers. He was also quite handy and could repair anything from wagon wheels to sewing machines. Jesse's blacksmith shop was so successful that he eventually expanded his business and began selling farm implements and farm supplies like plows, harrows, buggies, and wagons. He was the first person in the community to manufacture and sell barbed wire. Here on one of the workbenches in the blacksmith shop are photos of Jesse Hoover and his adult son, Herbert. Leaving the blacksmith shop, I continued to walk around the Herbert Hoover National Historic Site, where there are several other historic buildings that have been restored and open to visitors. One of these buildings is the community school. This one-room school was built in 1853 by the Quaker Society of Friends. In addition to being used as the schoolhouse, the building also served as the community's first Friends meeting house. The fast-growing community soon outgrew the school, and it was sold and moved several times over the years. In 1968, the National Park Service acquired the building and moved it here, where it has been restored to appear as it did in the 1850s. While it is unknown if Herbert Hoover actually attended school in this building, it has been documented that this is the oldest building in the Herbert Hoover National Historic Site. Another of the historic buildings is the Friends Meeting House that was built here in 1857. By design, the Friends Meeting House is a simple structure built without any steeples or spires. It is not referred to as a church, as Quakers believe that worship can occur anywhere, not just at a designated structure. The interior of the meeting house is just as simple. Simple wooden benches are where the Friends sit in silence, often for extended periods of time, waiting on the Word of God to come to them. There are no decorations or ornaments in the meeting room, because true to Quaker beliefs, they do not want anything to distract them from the presence of God. The Friends Meeting House was originally located 2 blocks from here. In 1964, the National Park Service acquired the building and moved it here. It was restored to appear as it would have looked when a young Herbert Hoover sat on these plain wooden pews. Herbert Hoover's time here in West Branch came to an end when his father died at the age of 34 of heart failure on December 13th, 1880. His mother, Huldah, died 3 years later, leaving Herbert and his 2 siblings orphans. 9-year-old Herbert first lived on a nearby farm with his aunt and uncle. Then, in late 1885, he moved to Newburgh, Oregon, where he lived with another uncle. There, Herbert worked in his uncle's real estate office, where he developed an interest in math and finance. Even though Herbert did not attend formal high school, he did further his education by taking night classes, where he excelled in bookkeeping and finance. In 1891, Herbert enrolled in Stanford University, where he studied geology. At Stanford, he was something of a shy man and a mediocre student at best. He served as a student manager on both the baseball and football teams and helped organize the first football game between Stanford and Cal Berkeley. Upon graduating, he pursued a career as a mining geologist, taking several low-paying jobs in the western United States. Herbert finally landed a job with a London-based company that had mining interest in Australia. Herbert spent the next several years overseeing the company's mining interest in the outback. Through his efforts, the company eventually controlled almost half of the gold production in Western Australia. In 1898, Herbert met a young woman named Lou Henry. He also became a junior partner in the company and was placed in charge of the company's interest in China. On a short trip back to the United States in 1899, Herbert and Lou were married. After his marriage, Herbert returned to China, where he developed several very successful gold mines. Then, at the turn of the century, the Boxer Rebellion broke out. Fearing the collapse of the Chinese government, Herbert returned to the United States. Back in the United States, Herbert was largely self-employed, applying his skills as a mining consultant. He used his knowledge and finances to rejuvenate several troubled mining operations. He used his share of the profits to make a number of very successful investments, and by 1914, Herbert Hoover was a very wealthy man, a millionaire several times over by today's standards. Herbert's financial success attracted the interest of a number of politicians, and at the end of World War I, it was estimated that several million people throughout Europe would face starvation. Herbert Hoover was placed in charge of the American Relief Administration. This launched his political career. From the National Historic Site, it's just a short walk or drive to the Herbert Hoover Presidential Library and Museum, which was closed during my visit in June 2021. I'm going to insert a few photos from a previous visit to the museum as I make the short drive out to the final resting place of President and Mrs. Hoover. During the European Relief Program, tons and tons of flour was distributed in sacks. These flour sacks were made into clothing, pillows, sheets, and other functional items. The people decorated these sacks with hand-stitched designs that featured everything from roosters, lions, and the American flag. Several hundred of these flour sacks were presented to President Hoover and are on display in his presidential museum. In 1920, Hoover supported Warren G. Harding for president. When Harding won the election, he rewarded Hoover by appointing him Secretary of Commerce. After Harding died in office, he continued to serve as Commerce Secretary under President Calvin Coolidge. While serving as Secretary of Commerce from 1921 to 1928, Hoover had quietly built up support among the country's political leaders and decided to seek the Republican presidential nomination in 1928. He secured the nomination on the first ballot and went on to defeat Democratic nominee Al Smith, receiving 58% of the popular vote. He was widely regarded as a popular president until the stock market crash of 1929, which resulted in the Great Depression. Hoover's popularity plummeted, and even those in his own party failed to support any of his policies to bring the country out of the Depression. Hoover ran for re-election in 1932, but was defeated by Franklin Roosevelt in a landslide. He left Washington in 1933, and since Coolidge, Harding, Woodrow Wilson, and William Howard Taft had all died prior to 1933, and Roosevelt died in office, Herbert Hoover was the only living former president from 1933 until 1953. After leaving office, President and Mrs. Hoover retired to California, where they lived until Mrs. Hoover's death in 1944. After his wife's death, President Hoover moved to New York City, where he made his home in Suite 31A of the Waldorf Astoria Hotel. During the next 20 years or so, Herbert Hoover was the country's elder statesman. Leaders of both political parties often sought his counsel. During World War II, he spoke several times with President Harry Truman. Despite the two men's political differences, they developed and maintained a close personal friendship. In 1958, Congress passed the Former Presidents Act, which provided a yearly pension for former presidents. Truman, who needed the money, accepted the pension. Hoover, who did not need the money, also accepted the pension. Many think he did so as to not to embarrass his friend. Throughout the rest of their lives, Harry Truman and Herbert Hoover remained in close contact, corresponding often. In fact, President Hoover's last written correspondence was an informal note to President Truman wishing him a speedy recovery after learning that Truman had suffered an injury due to a fall in his bathtub. When Herbert Hoover died on October 20th, 1964, he was 90 years old and had been out of office for 31 years. This was the longest retirement in presidential history until Jimmy Carter broke the record in 2012. President Hoover lay in state in the United States Capitol, and his state funeral was attended by Presidents Lyndon Johnson and former Presidents Harry Truman and Dwight Eisenhower. After the state funeral, his body was returned here to West Branch, where he was buried on October 25th, 1964. Following her death in 1944, the president's wife, Lou Henry Hoover, was buried in Palo Alto, California. A short time after President Hoover was buried here in West Branch, the First Lady was reinterred here next to her husband. Well, this video has gotten a little long, so I'm going to end it here at the Herbert Hoover National Historic Site in West Branch, Iowa. This also ends my adventure across the Hawkeye State. During this little adventure, I visited the grave of Sergeant Charles Floyd, the only person to die during the Lewis and Clark expedition. Then it was over to Humboldt, Iowa, and I visited the grave of noted broadcast journalist Harry Reesner and professional wrestler Frank Gotch. I also stopped in Newton, Iowa, and paid my respects to Frederick Maytag, the man who gave us the Maytag Washer. You can find a link to those videos in the description below. If you have any memories or thoughts on the people that we visit in these videos, I hope you'll leave me a comment. Most of the content on this channel is cemetery related, and I post a new tombstone video every Sunday morning. From time to time, I may post a train video or something else that I've stumbled on during my travels. So if you want to keep up with all of my adventures, be sure to ring that bell and subscribe. And a thumbs up is always appreciated. So until next time, please remember, life is a wonderful journey. Be sure to take time and enjoy it. And I'll see you down the road. So long, everyone.